So I'm very thankful this is a restorative class because I'm about 50% of my normal energy, which is usually, I consider myself a very energetic person. So it's hard, but I'm being challenged in a good way to do less. And this practice will be really good for all of us. So we're going to just start getting centered, and you want to have your less dominant cross-legged position. So if you're in your preferred one, just switch out your legs and just take a moment to adjust the flesh out from underneath you. Make sure you have enough support underneath you, that your lower back is not rounded or collapsed. And then just use a little pressure down through the hands to help you invite space in your torso. And as you feel this lightness and extension in the torso, make sure you're not finding it at the cost of uprooting your sitting bones, or maybe you notice the legs start to grip. We don't want to rob the foundation of the pose. So go ahead and just kind of balance out those energies in your body. And then as you feel kind of balanced, then join the hands in front of the heart. Pointing your gaze away from your brain, signaling the brain to start to take more of a back seat with this practice. Just start to tune in to that radio station of your inner experience. And scanning for any tensions that are in the body that aren't necessary to holding this seated position. Let your shoulders fall away from your ears. Release any gripping in your abdomen. Softening your jaw, your cheeks, your forehead. And as you feel ready, taking a bow to the heart. Also reaching the heart center up. And then releasing your hands down. Lifting your head, letting your eyes come open. And welcome. So today we're going to do a 4-minute time allotment for our poses, but that can include setup, because I don't want you to rush your setup on these long holds, because the setup is so important to feeling like you can sustain the poses. So make sure you're taking time setting up your poses. We're going to come into standing forward fold Uttanasana first, and you're going to want to have something to support your head. So you could do some sort of a setup with your blocks, like a T. You could use your chair if you feel like you're pretty tight this morning and your head reaching the blocks is not actually possible. And we are going to take a wider stance, so a little bit wider than your hips. And then of course you want your hands to be supported somehow. And that could mean that if they don't touch the floor, you put something extra. If you don't have 4 blocks, it could be soup cans or whatever you have around, just to give your hands some support. So spend a little time setting this up. Your toes should be right in front of your heels. And again, just give yourself a really generous amount of space between the feet, not a full wide standing forward fold, which we're actually going to do next. Just a little bit wider Uttanasana. And if you find that your hands touch the floor, I find it restful to have the palms facing up, because then my shoulders feel truly surrendered and I can really feel that full suspension of the torso. So if you have excess arm length and you're touching the floor well, you might play with the palm up position. So we do, in this class, we talk about the 8 tenets of yoga, and we're on niyamas, which is the second tenet. And of the niyamas, we're now talking about the very last one, Ishvara Pranayama, which means devotion. And when you come into this practice of yoga and deepen it and start to experience samadhi, which is that bliss state that we can find in our practice, you start to really have a sense that there is something beyond yourself. And so this final niyama is a devotion to whatever that is. And this devotion can come in the form of your practice. It can come in the form of faith when there is fear. And it doesn't mean you have to believe in some religion or some specific godlike figure, but it's a knowing that there is something beyond yourself. We're about more than halfway through this Uttanasana, and just kind of notice how the posture starts to slowly develop over time. In another class, we would leave the posture sooner. And so restorative yoga gives us a chance to really study these poses more closely. What happens in the poses when there's less effort, more time, more patience, maybe more gentleness in your approach. And of course, all of the postures are really designed to take us on this journey of quieting the brain, which is why your setup is so important. You can always adjust the setup as you develop the pose and elongate the physical body. You might need to reduce the height under the head. About 20 more seconds here. When we hold postures for a long time, we go really deep. So you always want to be very vigilant as you start to exit the posture. Just lifting the head, maybe finding a softness in the knees, maybe using a slow, kind of gentle standing up technique. And then just join the feet and take a few moments in Tadasana, closing the eyes, being upright. Noticing the breath, any after effects as far as energy, physical effects, mental effects. And then as you feel ready, as you feel prepared for another posture, you're going to start to create the setup for a head-supported Prasarita Padottanasana. So we're going to come into a wide standing forward bend now. You won't need as much height for your head because you're going to be closer to the ground. So you might want to swap out your props, your blocks, I should say, for a bolster, a blanket, maybe a blanket over a block. It just depends how much gap you're filling. So you might have to do an experimental setup and see if it's right. So take some time. And we are starting those 4 minutes. So whenever you're ready, you can just come into that forward bend. Again, passive arms will be best so that the shoulders can truly surrender. This month, we've talked a lot about fluid energy. And the shoulders are part of that. So if we get caught up with some kind of, I call it limbo land, your body doesn't know what you're wanting it to do, then we get stuck with that fluidity. So you want the shoulders to really be surrendered. So again, maybe resting on the forearms or the backs of your hands. And as level 2 practitioners, we're not going to talk about all the tiny little details of these poses today. I really want this to be kind of like a less noisy class. But do make sure that you're kind of running your body scan, checking on your feet, checking on the weight bearing, that you are actually considering those alignment points. And as you guys keep holding for another 2.5 minutes, I'm gonna be reading some passages intermittently. Again, I don't want to crowd the class with my talking all the time, but just some kind of really relevant passages from my new favorite book, Bringing Yoga to Life by Donna Farhai. The power that yoga has to shift seemingly intransigent negative patterns and to awaken the body, mind, and heart to other possibilities. No matter who we are or how long we've been entrenched in self-defeating behaviors, through daily yoga practice, we can become present to our own fundamental goodness and the goodness of others. And this week we talk about resting in thanks. And as I've always said, one true piece of evidence of a really sound yoga practice is that we find gratitude showing up more and more in our lives. And so this practice can really change our outlook to find the good within ourselves, within others, within our situations. Just another half a minute here. Again, you're going to slowly begin to bring yourself out of this pose, lift your head, maybe walk the feet in closer together, and find a way to come up quietly and gently. And come back to Tadasana. And just standing in this pose and just taking a moment to acknowledge any residuals. We're going to be transitioning into Adho Mukha Svanasana, downward dog. We're going to do it twice today. And just a couple of things about that. The first version of it, we're going to use a block for head support, and we're going to be extending the cervical spine a little bit. We'll talk about that once we're in it. The second version, we'll use a softer prop like a bolster. But each pose we're going to hold for four minutes. That being said, feel free to come into child's pose and take a break and return to the pose as you're ready. Because this is your practice, and being agitated is certainly not the plan or the goal. So it's your job as a yoga practitioner to really discern what is needed and to abide. So we're going to start with the block being the first head support. And there's really not a wrong way to use the block. So you're just going to position it to what you anticipate is the amount of height needed. And you can widen this pose a little bit so that you're a little closer to the block. You can walk your hands a little forward so you're not in that perfect vertical arm position. Because it's a longer hold, you're going to bring the knees slightly wider, the feet slightly wider, and maybe turn the fingers out to give you a little bit more support. And just come into it as you're ready. So like I said, we want to extend the cervical spine first a little bit. So it's almost like you're trying to look toward your thumbs, but you're going to be resting more on the forehead. And this is going to help you sink the shoulder blades into the back, and you guys look really good. So that's looks like you're doing it well. And try not to be aggressive and try not to press the heels down. Be very kind of more interested in the length of extension you can find by drawing the hips away from the wrists and by taking those shoulder blades into your front body. And anytime the head is supported, whether we're on the forehead or the crown, it brings a quietness to the brain, supporting us to sustain the pose a little bit longer. No effort is needed. You're just dialing in the exact amount of effort needed. We don't need to exhaust ourselves or use effort where it isn't needed. Just keep drawing your hips toward the ceiling and back to support the pressure on the hands and wrists. Every time you exhale, just dropping those shoulder blades into the chest a little bit more. We're halfway through here. Again, if you need a break, feel free to take a child's pose and then come back in. This is an inversion, so the energy flow is from the upper body toward the lower half. One more minute to go. If you come down into child's pose at this point, you can just stay there. If you feel like the quality of the pose is starting to break down, that's another clue to come into child's pose. You can start to bring yourself down to your knees and sit back with your butt towards the heels. Because we're doing such long holds, let's give the arms a break. So flipping your palms to face up from your child's pose. And then place your forehead down, bend your elbows, and just take your fingertips onto your back. And with the fingertips on your back, push the elbows toward the top of your mat, away from your body, to lengthen the triceps, to relieve the triceps. So just to give you an out, if that was a really kind of big challenge and you're not up for a second run, you could do a repeat of Uttanasana or a chair version of Uttanasana. So you're standing in a vertical position with your legs and then resting your head on the edge of the chair. So always know you have choices, and I'm not a dictator here. I'm just suggesting poses. The second version of downward dog, we're going to use head support that's soft. And we're going to be more towards the crown of the head than the forehead. And again, if a 4-minute hold is not right for you, you're going to come out of the pose and return, or come out of the pose and stay. So you might need to build up this height for your head to meet. So just one bolster might need an additional blanket or two. And we're on the timer. We're just going to do another 4-minute hold. And again, you might want to have a more spacious dog, meaning your arms are just kind of a little bit more forward than usual. You might also separate the feet just slightly wider than your hips. And now you should feel your chin is kind of snuggled in toward your chest. The back of the neck is long. We're no longer extending the neck so much. And with the crown of the head touching the soft prop, we want to feel that it's lengthening into the prop, that we're not jamming the head or shortening the neck. You might start to rest in the flow of your breath with your attention. We're already a minute into this, a little beyond the minute. Another passage from this book. Inside this more natural rhythm, where there is time to pause, breathe, feel, and perceive clearly, we find that the most valuable thing we can ever possess is clearly within our sights, this life itself. We see that yoga has less to do with standing on our head than standing on our own 2 feet, and that the physical practices of yoga remain mechanical gymnastics until transmuted by our intention to clarify the mind and open the heart. The yama and niyama prerequisite principles for living thus lay a foundation that will serve every aspect of our life, on or off the mat or meditation cushion. 1 more minute to go. And again, if you come down at this point into child's pose, you can just stay there. Begin to bring yourself into child's pose. So in a self-guided way, as you're ready, you'll begin to prepare for Shirshasana, which is headstand. If you'd like an alternate for that inversion today, you could do legs up the wall pose, which is another inversion, just more passive inversion. And it's safe to do when you're avoiding other inversions. So we're going to start the timer now, and you can just set up and come into Shirshasana as you're ready. So I usually recommend either a 2 or 3 or 4 ply yoga mat. So you want to fold it, make a little bit extra cushion, but don't, if you have one of those very thick yoga mats, just be cautious that you're not making it too squishy, which is unstabilizing for the pose. Use a wall if you don't usually use a wall. It's just today is about a more quiet and supported practice. So even if you're a freestanding headstander, you can use the wall and just receive a little extra support. Just like any pose, try to take any unnecessary gripping, any unnecessary contracted energy. There is necessary contracted energy here, but identify where you can be soft, where you can be passive. Lift with your legs. Really dig in with your forearms. Keep the scapula inserting forward toward the chest. And keep some integrity in the tailbone, moving toward the front body. Finding repose in your pose. Being able to find the quiet side of a pose that's more demanding. And again, if you come out of your headstand at this point and you come into child's pose, it's best to just stay in your child's pose. After we've been up so long, if we come up again, we usually do a little bit less quality, and then we're agitating the brain and the body. We just have another half a minute here. You guys look great. You're going to start to Bring yourself out of Shirshasana as gently as you can. And once you're down, just take some time to sit in a pose that's restful for you. We're going to set up Viparita Dandasana. You don't have to come out of child's pose yet if you're not ready. But this is one of our 2 chair poses. So the non-backless chair can be your footrest. The backless chair is going to be where you're going to kind of thread yourself into. And so if you don't have a backless chair like Anna, it might work, not for all bodies, but might work to work with the chair sideways like a desk chair, so that you can just lie down that way and kind of mimic the purpose of the backless chair today. And then of course we want, for Viparita Dandasana, we want to support the crown of the head. So in front of that chair that you're going to be sitting on, you can set up your head support. And I like to run my bolster kind of vertically through or underneath so that I don't have a bunch of bulk off to the sides. And I usually add a kind of ample height, and then as I shed those, the need for that height, I can toss it aside while I'm in the pose. So thanks for sticking with my kind of, I feel like I have a very dull brain right now. Maybe that's lending itself to restorative practice, I don't know. So we're going to come into the chair this way, and again, if you don't have that backless chair, you can kind of improvise with the sideways chair. The legs are going to be supported, and you're going to be kind of sliding forward until you're able to bring the top of your head onto the soft supports. And here you might need to adjust that height. You might notice it's too much or too little. So it's the crown of the head. And then you also want to be able to maybe thread your arms between the chair legs and grab on that way. It's going to help you really find that awesome spreading and lift of your chest. This is a milder version of Viparita Dandasana. We are going to do a little bit deeper in the next pose. We're not going to have the feet up high. So your back is getting way less kind of an arc. I'm going to start the timer for us with my toe. So let me see, you guys look good. And Anna, I love that you're in a dark room. When I take the restorative class, when I'm not teaching, I turn my lights off because to me it's really peaceful, but I can't see you very well. So I'm just going to trust that you found your way. If you do have hold of the chair legs, sometimes it's nice to turn the palms to face out. So you're kind of catching the chair legs with your fingertips and winding your palms to face out. It gives you extra rotation on the shoulders. And just like with your downward dog, head supported downward dog, if you get a sense that your energy flow from the crown of the head is stopping where you meet the props, it might be a sign you have too much propping. We want to feel that there's a continuous stream of energy coming out of the top of the head, not being jammed, not shortening the neck. I might be saying that because I'm feeling it myself. So I'm going to remove that extra blanket. And there we go. We have a better experience in the pose. So as we hold this pose, just think about, hopefully you're feeling a nice neutral, spacious experience in your lumbar spine. So let this be an imprint for when we go to the deeper version, that we really want to recreate this freedom, space, extension, neutral feeling in the low back. Breathing well. Just a minute and a half to go here. Finally, we turn outward the inner focus that has been so necessary to establishing a yoga practice. We find that what began as a personal practice for our own benefit can change the very nature of our everyday life and the wider world in which we live. We discover that this self-reflective journey has not made our world smaller and more encapsulated, but rather has dismantled our perception of separation. This new awareness allows us to see that no matter how different we may appear on the surface, we all share the same life. And it allows us to see that no matter how convinced we are of our own ideas, there's always another facet to consider. Such an undefended self can arise only out of the inner tempering process of daily practice. Such is the paradoxical virtue of practice. Through steeling and strengthening ourselves in the kiln of daily practice, we unleash our capacities to be vulnerable, tender, and open. The world is in desperate need of these qualities. We are going to start to come out of this pose. We're just going to eliminate the support for the feet. And if you find that, or if you already know that's not a good idea for you, you can repeat what you just did with the feet elevated, just a milder back bend. So let's all just come up for a moment. And just do some very kind of intuitive, self-guided twisting. Soft and not holding the twist very long, just kind of turning side to side several times. And you'll start to come back to center and just decide which version you're going to go for. If you're going to bring the feet to the floor, you can do that. There is a kind of an intermediate step. You could, instead of choosing between the floor, which is very kind of extreme, or the chair, which is very mild, you might put some blocks under your feet. So make sure to, and Rebecca, I think maybe we've done that in the past where that's helpful for you. So maybe elevate your feet. You might not know yet, so just know where your blocks are and maybe put them closer if you think you might need them. And we'll get the timer going here. It's the very same pose, just with a deeper arc in the spine with the feet lower. But we are trying to keep the legs extended. So you want to be on your heels. And you want to take a little bit of a wider stance with the feet to create space in the sacrum. And to be able to maintain the kind of alignment of the thighs so we're not splaying the thighs. Keep your toes pointing straight up. And you might do the same version with your hands kind of coming between your chair legs, which is very opening and broadening for the chest. It's also very conducive to the rotation of the shoulders that's really required in this pose. But you could also experiment with extending the arms overhead and continuing that very beautiful arc. And with arms extended, if you find your fingers hit the floor heavily, your arc doesn't have anywhere to go. So you're going to want to cross your arms and grab your elbows to keep that really luxurious arc of extension. We never want to truncate the flow of energy in the body. We want to encourage it, support it, nourish it. Remember that neutral low back. Can you recreate that spaciousness as you've made your pose more compact? And if not, you might need to modify. We're still resting the crown of the head. We're halfway through. And at this point, hopefully you've started to hang out in the repose stage. And maybe pull your toes towards you a little bit more, Rebecca. Yeah. So this looks good. I would say for the next time you do this, I would give your heels even a little more height because your knees are sort of bent, but it's looking pretty good. Energizing, revitalizing, mood lifting, heart opening, back bends. Really liberated feeling in the body. Last minute. And as with any pose, you're always welcome. You're always actually encouraged to trust your inner instincts if you need to come out early. Good. If you did come out early, just begin to do some gentle twists from side to side. Good. With the last 10 seconds, you're just going to start to bring yourself up. Use the back of the chair if you have it. Keep your stomach muscles tight. Keep your shoulder blades supporting your chest. And then, of course, do some simple twisting as a kind of palate cleanser to that very kind of stimulating back bend. Just kind of neutralizing the nervous system that way. So next is C2 Bandha. I totally misspoke. Supta Baddha Konasana. Supta means reclining, Baddha is bound, Kona is feet, or angle, I'm sorry. So we're coming into reclining bound angle pose. And there's many ways you can set this pose up. Today I'm going to recommend something that's like a bolster to run with the spine, mostly with your thoracic spine. And then something additional like a blanket to prop the head so that the chin can be tilted toward the chest, not away from. And then we are going to work with binding the legs. So if you have a strap, you can create a loop, a big, big loop. And if you have a strap that binds, you're going to bind that strap. Otherwise, you could tie it. And you can drop that loop down to your hips. Just drop it over your head, down to your hips. And then take part of the belt that's not metal and tuck it under your toes. And if you have, see, I just lost my train of thought. My brain is kind of slow. If you have excess, that's what I was going for there, you're going to want to kind of pull it off so that you're kind of right at your edge with your legs, with your bound angle part of this pose. And then of course, if the hips are resistant, if the knees are hovering in space, if your groins are gripping, those are all clues that you want to support and cradle the legs with something. Could be soft props like blankets, could be your blocks. So it's up to you. Bring your butt away from the end of your bolster and try to really start that bolster end behind the rib cage. So we really don't want a lot happening in the lumbar. Your butt flesh should be away from your back, not kind of scrunched up towards your back. So you might need to lift your butt and actually manually move that flesh towards your heels. Be on the backs of your hands. Make sure your head support is appropriate for the chin tilting down. And then you might kind of just move the shoulder blades, that coiling action we know, to bring the inner shoulder blades toward the chest. Coiling rather than jamming shoulder blades together. This is another 4-minute hold. Most of us won't need to leave early, but if something tells you to do so, it's best to kind of join your knees, widen your feet, and just take a counter position with the legs. This pose always reminds me that we can really achieve a lot without a lot of effort. Effort doesn't always equal progress. For me, that's one of the major takeaways of this pose, because it is so beneficial to opening the contracted chest and shoulders, to opening the diaphragm, to releasing groins and hips, opening the heart center, not only physically, but emotionally, kind of getting into that vulnerability we spoke of. Feeling undefended, as Donna Farhai puts it. Just let your breath be a tool for the mind to kind of latch on to and just kind of hang out with. This joy arises out of our own intrinsic nature and does not depend on external circumstances. Thus, one of the highest expressions of this state of being, samadhi, translated most accurately not as ecstasy, which means to stand outside the ordinary self, but entasy, which means to stand inside the self. Just one more minute here. Take your last deep exhalation. And after that, as you start to breathe in, just gently and slowly find a way to release the belt from your lower half and to join the knees and widen the feet. You may have noticed that the sequence moves from forward bending to back bending, and on purpose, I wanted to really mimic our monthly cycle because this single class can be a microcosm for that whole journey of the monthly postures. And we will, of course, finish with pranayama and shavasana. So we're going to set up for reclining hero. So you can start to move to your side. And for some of us, this reclining hero, some of us, including myself, needs really ample support to be possible, and not only possible, but sustainable for more than a few seconds. So there is no shame in using as much support as you need to basically build out the negative space under you and around you so that you can recline from the hero position back. So here are some suggestions. If you need a lot of support, you might angle a bolster with the block kind of at the head side. You'll probably want additional head height at the top of that bolster. And some people can do this pose without a single prop. So if that's you, you want to just abide by that and not have anything excessive ever. The props are really there to support us to get where we're kind of going, but not to prevent us from going deeper ever. Your sitting bones need support, whether it's the floor, whether they come down directly, as for some people they do. Others need a block. And if you're using a block, it's nice to have it the wide way to cover the space between the sitting bones so that you have a perch for your sitting bones. Some people have knee issues that maybe only show up here, but even if that's the case, you could put a blanket between your thighs and your calf muscles all the way up to the backs of the knees, which can be very relieving for knee pain. You can also support between the buttocks and the feet. So there's a million ways to do this. Some people have ankle issues here. You can roll tiny little mats under your ankles. So whatever bugs you in this pose, you want to kind of, maybe not today, but workshop it for yourself so you find a way to be in it sustainably, because it is one of the very best yoga poses, not only in my opinion, but a lot of people feel that way. And just start to come back. And if you realize this is not going to work, you of course have to spend some of those 4 minutes we've started just kind of refining it, Goldilocksing it. I'm trying to figure out what I need. I think I need a little more height today. And of course, as the body becomes more supple, as that gripping or tensing against starts to fall away, we have those reflexes in the body. Sometimes we have to wait out. You can reduce your propping. So start with a generous amount. And this is another back bend, so appropriate pelvic tilt to keep the feeling of spaciousness in the lumbar spine. Hands might start low, and as the instinct cues you, you could start to raise the arms overhead and again, kind of extend that arc. And chin should be very kind of snuggled in toward the chest. Pressing the tops of your feet down. And trying to root the shins down, especially your outer shins. Halfway through Supta Virasana, reclining hero pose. And let your gaze point away from your brain. Keep your face soft and quiet. Nice. Just one more minute to go here. If you extended your arms overhead, you might start to think about moving them down toward the feet or the floor. And then pressing your hands into the floor, leading with your breastbone, bring yourself up. And you can turn yourself around and just face the setup if you had one. And just take a very short downward dog with the head supported if that works, to relieve the legs from that deep flexion in the knees. Open the backs of the knees. And then you can come into a child's pose for a few moments, which is very neutralizing on the back after that sustained back bend. And then different than Viparita Dandasana, where we crown the head, crown of the head, we're going to come into Situ Bandha Sarvangasana, which is a very similar shape, except we have the back of the head resting. And so we're going to use 2 blocks, and we're going to use 1 blanket and our strap. So the blanket will be the soft padding for your head and shoulders. So it can be a rectangle at the top of your mat. And the block height, whatever you're going to use, should match. So you could be using the lowest setting, you could be using the medium, you could be using the tall. You're just going to kind of place whatever you think it might be, one for the foot side or end, and one next to you to slide under the sacrum in a moment. But we want to be able to contain the legs, which means we don't want to have to grip and squeeze to keep our heels on this little tiny platform. So that's where the strap comes in. So if you have that loop still from Baddha Konasana, you just slide it onto the legs. You have to make one if you took it out. But you're going to want to slide it onto your thighs somewhere so that you can basically bind your legs together. I always think of, we all probably know the Addams family, Morticia Addams in her pencil skirt. Your legs are really just sealed together. So really bind up that strap as well as you can to keep your legs compact and together. And then the feet go on your foot block last. So don't put the feet up yet. Just have that block kind of roughly where you think it will be needed. Head and shoulders should be on the same blanket support. Once your head and shoulders are on that blanket support, lift your hips and find that block setting that you're going to use, low, medium, or tall, and put it right under your sacrum. And again, whatever you're doing there, the feet should match the height. So extend your legs, find that foot block, rest your heels on the block, and put your toes pointed up. So you can really stream the energy from the heels all the way up. Take a moment to move the shoulder blades into the front body. Extend your arms so that your palms face up, kind of right outside the thighs. And then angle your chin toward your chest. And we're going to do 2 minutes on this pose and 2 minutes in the next pose. So because they kind of go together, this is preparation for Sarvangasana. So the efforts should not be just for effort's sake. They should be to neutralize the feeling in the body. So nothing is agitated. You really sense your way into alignment in yoga. One more minute here. Just begin to step your feet onto the floor by bending your knees. And from there, you can lift your hips and slide the block away from underneath your sacrum. Take the belt off your legs. Our last pose is going to be chair Sarvangasana. And I'll just kind of show you what my favorite setup is. I put my chair, first of all, this can be any kind of chair. It doesn't have to be backless, I should say. It's definitely not going to be like an upholstered chair is not good, but wooden or metal is great. So because we don't have to have the full forearms down, we don't need our normal 4 blankets, we can use a bolster. Or if you don't have a bolster, you could fold a blanket in half or fold 2 blankets in half and stack them. So I put an extra yoga mat, I fold it and I put it on the chair seat. If you don't have an extra yoga mat, that's okay. But if you have a little sticky mat pad, like cutting up an old yoga mat, it is good to have some traction there, because on top of that, I like to put a blanket. And if you just put a blanket on a chair seat without the traction, it might slide on you, which is, I don't really like that. So, I mean, I don't like that for anybody because it could be dangerous. So just be careful if you don't have that sticky mat or sticky mat pad. So we'll sit on the chair, putting the backs of our knees on the high part of the chair. And you guys can watch just for a moment, just to kind of see where we're headed here. Just scoot your butt towards the end of the chair seat so that you can help yourself kind of torso down on the chair, and then you're going to help your shoulders down onto the bolster. And I'm holding my chair with my arms here, with my hands. And then I can just keep my legs supported here. For some of us, that's a kind of a necessary thing. Or I could take my legs up. So you can feel free to come into this. And you might thread your hands inside the chair legs again, just to kind of feel that openness in your chest that's possible here. The chin should be snuggled into the chest, just like you just did for Setu Bandha, that preparatory position. This pose is considered the queen of all the yoga poses. It's considered the doorway to samadhi, that state of standing in ourselves, standing inside of ourselves. Just another minute. You can really invite the senses to pull away from the outer world here. Quieting the sense organs, most of which are on the face. And now to come out of the pose, you want to take your feet onto the higher part of the chair. And then if your arms are inside the legs, you're going to help the arms come out. And you're going to slowly roll down onto the floor. Try to control that. And your lower back should be left on that height, the bolster, the blankets. And your feet are left on the chair. You can cross your feet, cross your ankles. And just take a few moments, just resting in whatever remains, following Salamba Sarvangasana. Salamba means supported, shoulder stand, Sarvangasana. And now gently, slowly roll to your side, help your feet down. We're going to do a seated pranayama, which is just a little bit more demanding. Pranayama is generally done seated. We learn it reclining most of the time, just to kind of keep the body as quiet as we can. But the whole asana practice was developed to help us sit in meditation. So it makes good sense that we do pranayama seated. So you're going to give yourself support underneath you. You can take your dominant cross-legged position now, just to kind of have both in our class today, both crossings. And then the idea is really to keep that lift and spread of the chest that we learn in the back bends towards the end of the cycle. To keep the chin tilted toward the chest, but the chest lifting toward the chin. And you can keep your hands down, or you might kind of have them softly in your lap. We're going to do Viloma 2 today, which is interrupted exhalation. And it is usually taught with just 2 interruptions and 3 segments of exhale, but classically it's as many as you can do. So I'm not going to limit you if you can do more, but I'm going to just instruct the 2 breaks and the 3 segments. So just one thing to know before you begin is We want to kind of immobilize the diaphragm when you're in those pauses, you're not exhaling. And that doesn't mean you're hardening the diaphragm. So let's begin taking an inhale and an exhale. And just take another full inhalation. When you're ready to exhale, just take a third of the breath out and pause. Another third, pause. And the final third, fully empty. Easy breath in, easy breath out. And you might need more than one cycle of easy breathing before you continue. So just inner cueing, inner instinct. We're going to do 3 rounds. When you're ready, come into your second round of Viloma 2. Fully empty the exhale on that last segment. Take a few rounds of easy breathing. And I forgot to mention that just make sure you're taking a really nice deep inhalation before you try those Viloma 2 exhalations. We'll do our last cycle when you're ready. I'm just sitting for a few quiet moments. And as your intuition tells you, find your way into Shavasana. I really don't want to shortchange Shavasana, so if you want to stay longer than I haven't been very good at time management lately, so we are at 9:15. I'm going to hold space for a 5-minute Shavasana, but if you want to stay longer, it's certainly the time to do it. So just give yourself the support you need, whether it's for warmth, for comfort, for alignment, for passive eyes. Sometimes we need a little something like an arm sleeve, coat sleeve, sweatshirt, or belt, or eye pillow to keep the eyes quiet. And just spend some time creating the physical elements of the pose of Shavasana, fully reclining, separating the feet slightly, making sure the flesh of the buttocks is pulled away from the upper body. Making sure your head has the height it needs so that your chin isn't higher than your forehead. The residue of awareness that the practice creates. We can rest here now. This is where we begin to really see the benefits, the rose-colored glasses, the things we can feel gratitude for. Maybe that faith or trust that there's something bigger than yourself. There's divine order in the universe. Ishvara Pranayana, so the devotion to whatever that is. Something we might know by experience, but we can't exactly name. Just allowing yourself to be exactly as you are, no striving, no effort, just observance, allowance. So I'm not going to bring us up to seated. I'm just going to allow you to kind of self-guide yourself out today. And thank you all for joining me this morning. And namaste to you. Happy Thanksgiving.